would want to know all about their background. And I mean, is this just an incorrigible, incurable person who's just doing this to destroy other people's property? Or is this an aspiring young artist who just, needed a canvas to write on and didn't really understand what he was doing? I don't think prison's going to do that guy any good, There's other ways of turning his life around. Does that answer the question?
Yes, thank you. I also want to know, as a professional investigative reporter, how would you begin finding out about the ghost team if someone wanted to research about that tactical unit? Because we've called LAPD searching for any information on the ghost team, and they tell us they'll look into it, they'll get it back to us, but then they refuse to share any information about it when they get back to us.
I think you have to understand, I was a reporter here for 30 years. So, I mean, there were guys when I started as a reporter here that were young cops that eventually became, head of units, and, even one became chief that I knew was a young guy. So, what was your question again? I'm sorry, I lost my thought.
We've tried, as a professional investigative reporter, how can we find out more info on the ghost team when it feels like the LAPD is stonewalling us?
It's very different for me because, cops too all knew I do all these stories. So, they would approach me with that. I think that I don't know if it was the ghost team at the time, but they called me and said, would you like to do some stories? We're trying to, crack down on this. And they were good stories, and so it was a little different from me from that angle. I had access in a lot of these areas with police that the average reporter wouldn't have. I knew a lot of these cops for years. I think they viewed a lot. It's funny, they viewed a lot of what I did being good for them. And in some cases it was. There were stories that we did that I know that the sheriff started task forces, There were certain areas where there were gang murders going on, and we did stories about that. Then the sheriff would make a task force of like 12 officers, and they'd work that. So, from the smart cops know that the newsman can be your friend, because they want to work certain things. They've got bosses that tell them what to do. They love to have proof of what's going on to influence their boss's decisions on what they might do and what kind of money they might get to work certain crimes, So, the newsman can be a cop's friend, It's kind of sad that some cops don't understand that. I think they see the news as the enemy, but really, if they work it right, it's their friend.
Thank you. Makes sense. You have special connections, and you're well known already. Now, another story you cover was the tag banging era in graffiti. When do you first hear about taggers shooting each other?
I don't know when we first heard about it, but it might have been one night I can't remember where the area was, but we were shooting a tagger, and he actually got shot at, And I think that was sort of the genesis of us looking into tag bangers. We'd not seen that kind of violence with taggers before. And then, like I said, we had a couple young guys that sort of worked the streets for us too, always telling us. And we really did. We were the first, I think, to report on the tag banger thing. And that was really sad too, because, like you have these kids that were taggers. Some of them were, decent kids. They just didn't understand, I think, that they're damaging people's property or anything. But all of a sudden, they're in gang areas, and you can't tag in a gang area because that gang is the only person tagging there, And we were out one night and the gangster shot at this tagger, and I think that's where we sort of took it seriously, and we started hooking up with some of these tag banger crews, And I think even the police at that time didn't understand what a tag banger was. I think we were the first people to really identify that. And the sad part about that is like, a lot of these guys who just got into graffiti, all of a sudden, your friend's shot at or something, and then you start carrying a gun, then you shoot somebody, and the next thing you know, you're a gangster. And the next thing you know, you're in prison. you know, and that's just like, you know, violence begets violence, you know, and it's just, that's the sad part of all this stuff, you know.
As you're doing your story about tag banging, are you out with the writers? Are they showing you their guns? Are you surprised by how many guns are out there?
There's always a gun in a crew. I mean, you know, whether it's a tag banger crew or a gangster, there's always somebody in that crew who has a gun. It's my understanding. I mean, that's always, you know. And the really hardcore ones are maybe more than one person with a gun. But there's always a guy carrying a gun, you know.
In the 90s,
in my experience, there's always some guy with a gun. Yeah.
In the 90s, it seems like it was a more violent era. And having a gun was more of a fashion statement, would you say? Would you agree with that?
Well, I think, you know, I think that what was the LAPD movie about?
Colors?
Colors. I think Colors had a great influence at the time on gang growth, not only in Los Angeles, but across the country. That had a lot of influence, I think, on, you know, there's like 18th Street's a gang that was born here, you know, White Fence. I mean, you know, you go back to Chicago now, you know, there's an 18th Street. There might be one in New York. I mean, or MS-13 is even a better example. I mean, they're all over the country now. And some of these kids would, you know, they weren't from here. They just heard the name on a TV show or, you know, or in the movie Colors, the Crips and Bloods thing. They just picked, there's Crips in little towns in Indiana, you know, and they just saw it in the movies. You know.
Do you know where the term tag banging came from? Many people say Fox News coined it. What are your thoughts on the word tag banging, and where do you first hear it?
Yeah, we didn't make that up. I mean, it came as a surprise to us when we first went out there, and we knew that these shootings were happening, and somebody told us that now there are tag bangers. And I remember going to a meeting that was even we had that in a story. It got so out of hand, like there were like 10 crews or so that had a peace meeting, you know, to try to control what was going on because they were worried about it, you know. It's funny, I mean, these tagger guys, they were so into it, you know. It's like you're a football player in high school and that becomes your whole life. For these kids, it was tagging, you know, and it gave them fame and notoriety in their own minds. And they ran away with it, you know, and it ran away with their lives at the time. And the unfortunate part of this, really, when you see kids that are 12 or 14 and they're shooting somebody or they're dead, I mean, I can't tell you how many homes I've been into talking to a mother or father who was a dead kid, you know. I mean, it's heart-wrenching. It's heart-wrenching. Remember, I saw that so much that we finally did a series called Moms and Gangs, you know. And I remember sitting in this room with like a dozen mothers who all had their sons killed, you know. It all broke up their marriages, everything. And I remember I couldn't talk, you know. It was like I was earlier in this interview. My throat got restricted and my eyes started to well up because there's just so much pain in that room, you know, to lose a child. And to lose a child who's 12 years old or 14 years old because he was shot and killed by it's inconceivable if you're a father or a mother to imagine that happening. You know, it's what a waste, you know. It's more, you know, if your son died in battle in Vietnam or Afghanistan or something, you know, you could at least rationalize it was for some cause and he was trying to do something. But on the streets of LA, you know, tagging a wall and you get killed or walking in the wrong neighborhood, I mean, it's just, you know, it's a tragedy and it's a sickness, you know. And ever since I came from this town, every new mayor, and always talks about, you know, we're going to get control of the gang thing and everything, and no one ever does. No one ever does. And part of the reason is, in the neighborhoods where this happens, you know, when the cops show up there, you know, well, they're harassing their kids, but, you know, why are you harassing my kids? Well, because they're in a gang, you know. And then the cops become the bad guys, but really they're just trying to clean things up, you know. And it's a rough cycle that just goes on and on and on, and nobody ever seems to fix it, you know. And I think a lot of it has to come from the people who live in those neighborhoods. But then you've got to understand too that there are people in those neighborhoods who want to fight it, and some of them are threatened with their lives. You know, and then they've got. I can go home every night, you know, but if you're living in a neighborhood that's controlled by a gang, you know, you could get shot for some stupid thing, you know. So it's a really rough problem, and I don't know how you really fix it. Maybe you should almost teach it in the schools, you know.
At the height of the tag banging era, word comes down, I'm not sure from where, but word comes down that taggers must now join gangs or they have the green light. Do you hear about this rumor?
Yeah.
And what are your thoughts about it?
Yeah, no.
Where does it originate from?
We heard that too. You know, that the gangs didn't want the tag bangers. You had to either join the gang and quit the tag banger thing. But you know what happened though? In some cases, the tag bangers became more violent than the gang, and they kicked the gang out of the neighborhood. I can think of 2 incidents of that happening, you know, and that the tag banger guys became violent. And I think that, you know, as the tag banger phenomena became more and more violent, they needed more violent guys in it, you know, from that. And some of the guys who were in the street gang there became tag bangers. And then the names were kind of neater too, the tag bangers, than the gang name, you know. There's a sexier name than 18th Street, you know. There, a lot of the names were quite creative. Yeah.
Definitely. In your opinion, why does tag banging die out? It seems like past the 2000s, it's not as deadly in the streets anymore.
I think tag banging petered out because you had to become a gang member. If you were going to be violent, you had to be in the gang, you know. And I think that there was no in between anymore. You were either a tagger or a gang member. And I think that the Mexican mafia got involved in that at the time too. You had to be, if you're in that neighborhood, you had to be in the gang. You know, they weren't putting up with taggers either. They didn't really. And you know, I'll tell you, if you're a Mexican mafia guy and your mom lives in the East Side and some guy's tagging her garage, you know, he's mad about that. You know, even though he's sitting in Pelican Bay, you know, but he's sending out the word, you know, no more tagging. You know, it's all connected.